The night felt ordinary at first. The kind of quiet evening where nothing big is supposed to happen. The gas station lights buzzed softly above me, the air smelling faintly of fuel and warm asphalt. I'd stopped there like I had 100 times before, just trying to finish a long day without any drama. That's when she walked up to me, heels clicking with confidence, eyes already scanning me like she'd made a decision before saying a word. She didn't ask for help. She demanded it. She said her car was low and insisted I give her free gas. Not borrow. Not pay later. Free. Like it was something I owed her. When I told her no, calmly, respectfully, her expression changed. The smile tightened. The tone sharpened. She started talking about rules, about the HOA, about how people like me always think we're smarter than everyone else. The parking lot suddenly felt smaller. She told me she'd call the cops. Right there. Right then. And she said it like it was a promise, not a threat. Her phone was already in her hand, finger hovering over the screen, confidence pouring out of every word. Around us, other drivers pretended not to listen, but I could feel the attention shift. You could almost hear the tension settling in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just stood there while she spoke louder and louder, explaining to anyone who would listen how I was refusing to help, how I was breaking the rules, how this was exactly what was wrong with people these days. She mentioned the HOA again, as if saying it enough times would make her right. Inside, something twisted, not fear, but disbelief. How quickly a simple no had turned into a public accusation. How fast entitlement can become outrage. She finally hit the call button and stepped away, pacing, nodding along to whoever was on the other end. She glanced back at me with a look that said she'd already won, that the law was on her side, that I was about to learn a lesson. And for a moment I let her believe that. The red and blue lights were still minutes away, but the outcome already felt like it was racing toward us. The core question hung heavy in the air. What happens when someone so sure of their power calls the police on the one person they never expected? As the distant sound of sirens began to cut through the night, I reached into my pocket, felt the familiar shape there, and realized this confrontation was about to turn into something none of us were ready for. I stayed where I was, hands still in my pocket, watching her pace near the curb like she owned the place. People like her were familiar to me, not personally but professionally. I'd seen that look before. The certainty. The belief that authority was something you could borrow just by sounding confident enough. That belief was dangerous, not because it was loud, but because it was convincing. This wasn't my town, not exactly. I'd been driving back from a late meeting, out of uniform, mind already drifting toward home. I'd chosen this gas station because it was quiet, tucked just outside an HOA neighborhood known for complaints and rules written in bold letters. The irony didn't escape me now. She kept glancing over her shoulder, making sure I was still there, still watching. Each time, her expression hardened, like she was rehearsing the story she'd tell when the police arrived. I could almost hear it already, how she'd paint herself as the reasonable one, how she'd describe me as uncooperative, maybe even threatening. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to control a situation by controlling the narrative. What she didn't know was that I'd spent most of my career dealing with moments exactly like this. I'd stood on both sides of flashing lights. I'd watched how quickly assumptions turn into accusations, how easily people decide who's right before the facts even show up. That knowledge didn't make this easier. If anything, it made the waiting heavier. A car pulled in, slowed, then left again. The clerk inside the station kept pretending to rearrange shelves, eyes darting toward the windows. Everyone felt it now, the tension, the quiet build-up before something official made it real. She ended her call and folded her arms, chin lifted. "They're on their way," she said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "You should have just done the right thing." The phrase stuck with me. The right thing. To her, it meant giving in, letting entitlement win because it was louder. But to me, the right thing had always meant something else. Standing still, letting the truth arrive on its own time. I thought about how many people freeze in moments like this, how fear makes them apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. I wondered if she expected that from me too. A backstep, a nervous explanation. anything that would confirm the version of me she'd already decided on. Instead, I leaned against the pump and waited. The sirens were closer now. Not loud yet, but unmistakable. Her confidence grew with every second, while something inside me tightened. Not from worry, but from knowing what was coming and how messy it could get. Titles have weight, so do misunderstandings. And when they collide in public, nobody walks away unchanged. She smiled again, small and sharp, like a victory already counted. The lights weren't in the parking lot yet, but their glow was beginning to reflect off the nearby road. And standing there, surrounded by strangers and assumptions, I knew the next few minutes would decide far more than who was right about a tank of gas. The police car still hadn't pulled in, but its presence was already shaping the scene. You could feel it in the way people stood farther apart now, in how conversations dropped to whispers. A young couple near the air pump got back into their car without finishing. The clerk finally stepped outside, hands folded nervously, pretending to check something that didn't need checking. Everyone was bracing for a moment they didn't want to be part of. She noticed it too. The attention fed her. She straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, and began explaining herself to the clerk without being asked. How she'd only wanted help. How she believed in community. How some people just didn't respect rules. Each sentence was polished, rehearsed, built to sound reasonable. It was impressive, in a way, also unsettling. I watched her carefully, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. Somewhere along the line, she'd learned that being loud could pass for being right. That if you framed yourself as the victim early enough, the truth would struggle to catch up. I wondered how often that strategy had worked for her. How many times someone like me had simply backed down to avoid the hassle. A part of me felt the familiar pull to step in, to correct the story before it hardened. To flash the badge, end the tension, reclaim control. That was the temptation. And it was real. Power, even justified power, is seductive when it can make discomfort disappear. But I didn't move, because there was another part of me, the part shaped by years of difficult calls and complicated people, that knew how fragile trust really is. I knew what it looked like when authority was used too early, too loudly. When it silenced instead of clarified. If I stepped forward now, would I be proving her right in some twisted way? Would it look like a setup? A trap? The sirens dipped and rose again, closer now. Her eyes lit up at the sound, and she glanced at me like she was daring me to flinch. I didn't. Instead, I thought about the officers on their way. Young ones, maybe, or veterans. I wondered what story they'd been told on the radio, what picture they'd already formed before seeing either of us. Another car slowed at the entrance, then stopped, its driver watching with open curiosity. The scene was growing. So were the stakes. I realized then that this wasn't just about free gas or an HOA complaint. It was about perception. About who gets believed when two stories collide. About how quickly someone can be labeled based on tone instead of truth. I'd enforced laws long enough to know how messy that moment could become. She took a step closer to me, lowering her voice just enough to feel personal. "You still have time to fix this," she said, as if offering mercy. Her eyes searched my face for something. Fear, regret, submission. She didn't find it. The first flash of red and blue light swept across the pavement, just barely touching the edge of the station. Conversations stopped completely. My pulse stayed steady, but my thoughts raced. Because once those doors opened, there would be no rewinding this moment. And the question was no longer whether the truth would come out, but how much damage would happen before it did. The patrol car rolled in slow, tires crunching over gravel like it was taking its time on purpose. Red and blue lights washed over the pumps, the windows, our faces. For a split second, everything felt frozen, like the night was holding its breath. She stepped forward immediately, not toward me, toward the officers. Her voice rose before the car doors even closed. Confident, polished, certain. She spoke fast, layering details, shaping the story while it was still warm. Free gas, refusal, disrespect, HOA rules, safety concerns. She pointed at me without looking, like I was an object already labeled. I stayed where I was. One of the officers glanced my way. Just a look. Quick. Curious. Measuring. I recognized it instantly. The look you give when you know you're only hearing one side. When you're already preparing for the second. The other officer nodded along with her, jotting something down. That small movement tightened the air. It wasn't proof of anything, but it felt like momentum. Like gravity shifting in her favor. "Sir," one of them finally said, turning to me, "is that accurate?" The question hung there. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Not yet. Timing matters. Words matter more when the room is ready to hear them. She noticed my pause and smiled. Just a little. Private victory. Her shoulders relaxed as if the outcome was already sealed. Around us, phones appeared, subtle at first, then obvious. People recording. Waiting. The officer took a step closer to me. Not aggressive. Professional. But close enough to feel the weight of it. Close enough that I could see my reflection in his badge, distorted by the curve of the metal. "Sir," he said again, firmer this time. I could feel the familiar urge rising, the instinct to end it, to reveal the truth, to stop the narrative from running any farther ahead. I thought about how easy it would be, how one sentence could flip the entire scene on its head. But I also thought about what revealing it too early would do, how it might turn this into something else. Something messier, something public in the wrong way. She interrupted before I could answer. "He's being difficult on purpose," she said, shaking her head like she was disappointed in me. I tried to resolve this peacefully, but some people only understand consequences. Consequences. The word landed hard. The officer looked between us now, eyes narrowing slightly. The night felt tighter, louder, even though no one was shouting. The clerk hovered by the door. A car idled at the edge of the lot, engine humming nervously. The radio crackled on the officer's shoulder. Static. A voice. Indistinct, but urgent enough to draw his attention for half a second. That half second was everything. I reached into my pocket. Slowly. Not in fear. Not in defiance. Just enough to change the direction of the story. Her eyes followed the movement, sharp and alert. Her confidence wavered, just barely, like a crack in glass you only see when the light hits it right. "What are you doing?" she asked. The officer stiffened, and before anyone could stop the moment from tipping, I felt the edge of metal under my fingers, and knew the next move would decide how this night would be remembered. The moment my hand moved, everything sped up. "Sir," one officer said sharply, shifting his stance. The other's hand hovered near his radio. Not a threat yet, but the line had been crossed. Around us, someone gasped. A phone camera zoomed in. The air snapped tight. I stopped. Halfway. Palm open. "Wallet," I said quietly. Slow. The words seemed to reset the room by a fraction. The officer nodded once. "Go ahead." I pulled it out and held it where they could see. Leather worn at the edges. Nothing flashy. I opened it, not to the badge, not yet, but to a folded card tucked behind everything else. I slid it out and handed it to the closer officer. He glanced down. Then he froze. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just a pause that lasted half a second too long. His eyes flicked back to me, then down again, then to his partner. "What is it?" she asked, impatience creeping in. He didn't answer right away. He cleared his throat. "Dispatch," he said into the radio, keeping his voice neutral. "Can you confirm a name for me?" Her confidence wobbled. You could see it. She leaned forward, trying to read his face, trying to stay ahead of the moment. "What's going on?" she asked, sharp now. "Why are we stopping?" "He's the problem." The radio crackled. "A name. My name." The officer's shoulders tightened. His partner looked at him, then at me, and something shifted between them. An unspoken recalculation. Procedures, memories, old briefings sliding into place. She sensed it and moved fast. "That doesn't matter," she said, stepping in, voice rising. He refused to help. He escalated. "Ma'am," the second officer said, gently but firmly, We need a moment. The word ma'am landed differently this time. Not supportive. Not validating. Just procedural. I could feel the weight of it now. The misdirection had carried her far, but not far enough. Still, this wasn't over. Not even close. Because truth, once introduced, doesn't always clean things up. Sometimes it just makes the mess visible. The first officer handed the card back to me without comment. His eyes held mine for a beat, recognition mixed with uncertainty. He was choosing something. Respect, maybe, or caution. She crossed her arms, jaw set. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I called for help, and now I'm being ignored?" Ignored. The word cut both ways. The clerk stepped back inside. Car pulled out of the lot. Someone stopped recording. Someone else kept going. The radio crackled again. Louder this time. Clearer. A confirmation. A title spoken carefully, like it could break something if said too fast. The officers didn't announce it. Not yet. Instead, one of them turned to me and asked, quietly, "Sir, would you mind stepping over here with us for a moment?" Her head snapped toward him. "Why would he?" "Ma'am," the officer said again, firmer now. "Please." The space between us widened. Literally. They moved me away from her, away from the pumps, toward the edge of the lot where the lights didn't reach as far. The choice was deliberate, controlled. And as I took those few steps, I realized the twist wasn't just that I'd changed the story. It was that everyone now had to decide what to do with the truth once it was standing right in front of them. We stopped just short of the darker edge of the lot, where the lights faded and the noise thinned out. The officers stood with me in a loose triangle, close enough to talk quietly, far enough that the scene behind us couldn't hear every word. The woman was still visible in my peripheral vision, pacing now, arms cutting through the air as she argued with no one in particular. The first officer finally spoke, his voice low. "Sir, is there a reason you didn't identify yourself earlier?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. One I'd asked people myself more times than I could count. I took a breath. "Because I wanted you to see the situation before the title," I said. "Not after." He nodded slowly, like that answer landed exactly where it needed to. The radio crackled again, this time unmistakable. Dispatch confirmed it clearly, formally. The words carried weight even at a distance. Both officers straightened without meaning to. Training does that. Respect does that too, whether you want it to or not. They turned back toward her together. She was mid-sentence when she noticed the shift. Not just the officer's posture, but the energy. The way people were no longer leaning in her direction. The way the story had stopped moving forward and started circling back on itself. One officer raised a hand gently. "Ma'am, we need to clarify a few things." Her voice faltered for the first time. "Clarify what?" "I'm the one who called." "Yes," he said. "And we've reviewed the situation." I watched her face as realization crept in. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The confidence draining. The entitlement losing its grip. Her eyes flicked to me, then to the officers, searching for something solid to stand on. Who is he?" she asked, quieter now. That's when the second officer spoke, calm but unmistakable. He didn't announce it to the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He just said it plainly, like the truth didn't need volume to be heard. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. The tension broke, not with shouting or punishment, but with silence. The kind that settles after something heavy finally drops. Phones lowered. People turned away. The clerk let out a breath he'd been holding for too long. The officers explained, professionally, what the situation actually was. No crime. No violation. No free gas owed. The story she'd built unraveled without drama, thread by thread. But the real twist came after. As they wrapped up, one officer glanced at the incident notes on his tablet and frowned. "Ma'am," he said, "this isn't the first time we've been called out here by you." She stiffened. The pattern was there. Complaints. Escalations. Situations framed just enough to pull authority into personal disputes. Nothing criminal on its own, but together, It told a story she hadn't expected anyone to read out loud. The officers handled it by the book. No spectacle, no shouting, just accountability. When it was over, the lot felt strangely calm again. The night returned to itself. As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, because the truth had arrived the same way it always does, quietly, inevitably, and reminded everyone there of something simple. Power isn't in who calls the cops. It's in who tells the truth when they show up. The gas station slowly went back to what it had been before any of us arrived. Cars came and went. The clerk returned to his routine. The night air softened, carrying away the tension like it had never existed. The woman left without another word, her steps quicker now, her certainty gone. There was no dramatic exit, no final argument. Just distance growing between her and a moment she could no longer control. One of the officers lingered for a second before heading back to the car. He nodded at me, not as a superior or a subordinate, but as another human who'd stood in an uncomfortable truth and let it play out. That nod meant more to me than any apology could have. It told me the system worked, not perfectly but honestly enough when people let it. I finished fueling up in silence. The simple act felt grounding, ordinary again, and that mattered because moments like this have a way of sticking with you if you let them. I sat in my car for a beat before starting the engine, watching the reflections of the lights fade off the windshield. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how close the whole thing had come to becoming something else. How easily a raised voice and a confident lie can tilt the scales. I thought about how many people don't have the option to wait calmly, to trust that the truth will eventually speak for itself. And I wondered how many times authority is called not for safety, but for leverage. I didn't feel proud of who I was that night. I felt aware of it. There's a difference. Titles can solve problems fast, but they can also stop conversations before they start. I wanted the officers to see the situation the way they would for anyone else. I wanted the process to matter more than my position. In the end, it did. The woman never apologized. She didn't have to for the lesson to land. Consequences don't always come in handcuffs or citations. Sometimes they come as a quiet realization that power doesn't work the way you thought it did. That calling the cops doesn't automatically make you right. That respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. That night reminded me why I chose this work in the first place. Not for control, not for authority, but for fairness. For moments when the truth is allowed to surface without being shouted down. For the chance to stand still and let honesty do its job. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. How you act when you think no one important is watching says more about you than any title ever will. So the next time a situation gets tense, the next time you feel tempted to use power instead of patience, pause. Let the truth breathe. Let people be seen for who they are, not who we assume them to be. Because in the end, the strongest move isn't calling the cops. It's choosing integrity before you ever need to.